Hey everyone, welcome to the Conversations with Adrian podcast. Today I'm joined by Jim Laird. Jim, thank you so much for being on the show.
You're welcome. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's so good to have you, mate. I've been watching you from afar, obviously, with some of your work around strength and conditioning and lifestyle changes and things like that. I brought you on for a specific reason. I think we're both of a similar vintage. I'm gonna guess like we were both in our late 30s and looking to
I'm a little older than that.
I'm
I'm
45.
almost 50. I'm
Yeah,
almost
nice.
50.
Right. How old are you?
Almost 50.
Yeah, got it. I'm 45. So I think I'm doing this for selfish reasons because I'm getting to a point in my life where I've trained for the last 25 years in the gym
Sure.
and really taken to strength and conditioning and bodybuilding and
Hmm.
competed in a few physique shows in my 20s and late teens and things like that. But
Sure.
now I have this ambition to or a gravitation towards longevity,
Sure.
towards being flexible, towards being
Hmm.
lean and muscular and youthful,
Sure. Hmm.
and maintaining that inside and out. I don't want to be this sort of beautiful Adonis body on the outside, but dying on the inside, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So yeah, without further ado, I'd love to get a little bit of background on you because my listeners don't know that you've been a strength coach for 25 years and you've trained
Right.
a lot of people around the world. But catch me up on what you've been doing.
Well, I started out as a football player. I wrestled, I played football, American football. I played rugby too. Grew up in Canada, played hockey, played everything. And then basically, my college football career ended, switched to powerlifting, powerlifted for quite a long time. I used exercise to manage a lot of my trauma that had dealt with from my childhood. And so there came a point where I couldn't use my exercise to manage that anymore. And I got an autoimmune disease. I got, excuse me, ulcerative colitis. And then later on had some health issues from being a human zoo animal. Now I essentially live an outdoor lifestyle. I'm in Nicaragua right now. This is my outdoor kitchen. So my kitchen opens up to the ocean.
Beautiful.
So I do all my work outside essentially now. I sold my gym in Lexington, Kentucky, just after the beer bug, and moved to Florida. Started working with a guy named Dr. Leland Stillman, and we do a lot of lifestyle coaching. We have a medical side of the practice and then a coaching side of the practice. But I had to learn how to the difference between performance and health, and yeah, so that's basically a nutshell. I generally my clients tend to be hard charging type A personalities, particularly women, and I usually just have to teach them a little bit about self care and something I call that I stole from Paul Chek called working in, which is basically the harder you drive your car, the more you got to take it to the shop. The more you got to get the oil changed, the tires done, and the brakes. And most people just forget about that. They just keep pushing and pushing. And then you have the two extremes. You have the people that don't do anything.
Mm.
And those people are usually easier to work with because you can always get them to do a little bit more. The people that are type A, that my personality, it's hard for us to, we usually have to learn the hard way by crashing your car at a really high speed. And then, when you start, you dig yourself a hole, you crash and burn. And then as soon as you start feeling better, you floor it again, so trying to teach people a little bit about the harder you push, the more you got to rest. It's not an easy concept for type A people to kind of gravitate towards.
Yeah, 100%. I think this sort of do more type of attitude is something that it's almost ingrained as a core belief system, right? Like
Yes, in
back in
certain
the
people.
bodybuilding days, it's almost like if you said, what's the ratio? Like I'm going to have 2.2 grams of protein per kilo of body
Hmm.
weight. And you go, man, if I
Sure.
can have 2.2, what if I had like
What?
4.4?
Yeah,
Like that'd be double
three
the.
three's got to be better. That's right.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
100%. Yeah, so it's like we'll just go hard or go home. And I'm not sure if
I mean,
you
you can do that at certain times for certain periods of time, but over time, that attitude definitely will bite you in the ass eventually.
yeah, 100%. Um, when you were going through your autoimmune disease and things like that, like can
Hmm.
you speak to that a little bit? Like, how did you get out of it, or do you still manage that part of your life?
Well, what happened was, is I was working long hours. I was training like a maniac. I was taking performance enhancing drugs. And, my attitude at the time is like, why do I need to sleep? I'm on hormones. Right.
Mm.
And, it just, one day I woke up, you know, not to be too graphic, but, started bleeding while I was going to the bathroom, and it was a huge wake up call. And I started doing some reading. I started doing some research, and, it was after a car accident. It was after some traumatic stress I'd had in my life. And that's pretty common. And I learned that, like a day off from the gym is not rest if you're working 12 hours a day. So I had to learning how, I introduced things like the float tank, acupuncture. I changed my diet, and, I cut gluten out, and I was able to get my colitis under control. I kind of got into paleo. Rob Wolf. I actually met Rob Wolf before he was Rob Wolf.
Mm-hmm.
I met him in Redding, California, years before he was the paleo guy. And so I started looking into his stuff, and started studying Paul Chek and working in, and, doing things like Tai Chi and restorative yoga and float tank and things like that. And my sport itself, powerlifting, is a sport where you essentially um, overbreathe. And so you create this, when you're lifting weights, you rev yourself up through breath, and so you end up walking around in this state of high alert all the time. You have a hard time shutting that off. And so I had to learn how to shut all that off. And so I got my health under control. And then a couple years, probably, I guess it was 5-6 years later, I went and got a pedicure, and ended up getting a staph infection from that. I almost had my right leg amputated.
Wow.
And they told me, they got it under control. Luckily, it was only staph. And they told me this would come back. This infection would come back repeatedly. And there was nothing I could do about it. And it would come back just like I would get like flu-like symptoms without respiratory symptoms, and run a fever. And I was going septic a couple times a year, and they were running out of antibiotic options. And I ran into a very controversial person named Jack Cruz. Became friends with him, and he was like, look, man, he's like, what do you do for a living? I'm like, well, I'm a strength coach. I start working at 5 a.m. I don't get done till 8 o'clock at night. It's like, when's the last time you seen a sunrise? And I'm like, probably since I was a kid, or if I go fishing or something like that. And when I do, I wear sunglasses. So I always wore sunglasses, was never outside. I was essentially a zoo animal. And he's like, you do realize the sun runs your immune system, right? It regulates your immune system. It regulates all your hormones. He's like, man, you got to make some major changes. So I canceled all my morning classes. I started getting outside in the morning. I started taking sun breaks. I started keeping the windows open at the gym. And that kind of planted the seed in my head that I needed to have an outdoor gym. And that's what brought me down here to Nicaragua. And, since I've lived a more outdoor life, I haven't had any reoccurring infections. I was having 2 or 3 a year. We're talking like 100, Fahrenheit. I guess I could translate into Celsius, but like 105, 106 degree fever where you're like hallucinating and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so I haven't had one of those ever since I've made, you can see I'm Scottish descent. I've got, a pretty dark tan. I'm darker than a lot of Latinos here, because I spend so much time out in the sun, particularly in the morning. So it's changed my life, and I do all my work outside. Like right now, my kitchen, I'm in a kitchen that opens up to the outdoors. In the evening here, it's the sun comes up in the east here, so I do all my work upstairs on my upstairs patio.
Mm-hmm.
I live in a tiny house here, about 3 minutes from the beach. And then this time of day, when the sun comes over, I come down here in the kitchen and do my stuff. And also the wind is pretty windy here in the afternoon, so I do all my podcasts and stuff down here inside the kitchen. So there's not as much wind noise.
Yeah,
so
awesome.
Yeah.
With your strength and your powerlifting days, fun memories of that. Do you miss it?
Honestly, looking back, I mean, I trained, Jim Windler was my roommate. I met Jim Windler at the University of Arizona when I was a GA there. A guy wrote 531. He's the reason I moved to Lexington, Kentucky. I lived with Jim. I slept on a studio apartment floor for like a year. I trained a bit at Westside Barbell. The thing I regret about my powerlifting career is I really should have competed raw. I competed at a time when equipment was the big thing. And I did wide stance squatting. So, that's what everybody at Westside did, Louis Simmons. And I'm more of a narrow stance squatter, more of a quad dominant squatter, you might call it. I would have done much better competing raw. Um, you know, powerlifting is an interesting sport. It basically, you give up a lot of movement options. You become, even bodybuilding too, depending on how you do it. Lifting heavier things requires you to move less and create a lot of compression, which has downstream consequences. You know, that's why if you look at bodybuilders, powerlifters, as they age, they walk like a penguin, or they waddle like a duck. You know, because you're designed to move through turning, like your thorax turns and your hips turn the opposite direction when you walk. When you lift heavy things, you take that away, and so, you know, there's ways to train, strength train, to actually improve the way you move. And so that's what I do now. I don't do the traditional lifts quite as much.
Mhm.
I incorporate things that incorporate a lot of shifting, and you know, I don't aggressively pull my shoulder blades together anymore, because that takes away from your ability to move. I mean, it's great for bench press, it's great for big heavy lifts, but as far as being healthy and moving well, there's a lot of great little adjustments you can make so that you can still be strong and big,
Mm.
but you can move well as well. And, you know, so powerlifting doesn't really, that's one of the reasons powerlifters don't, you know, aren't competing in sports like football and, you know, sports that require movement,
Sure.
because pure powerlifting basically turns you into a fire hydrant, you know?
Yeah, exactly right. But you still hold a bit of body weight there. Like you look like you're fairly chunky. You're still
Yeah.
lifting weight.
Well, I wouldn't call myself chunky. I mean, I've got abs and stuff, but,
Oh no,
I'm
you know what I
too,
mean. I
I'm
didn't mean it like
250.
that.
You know, I'm from Canada. I'm embarrassed. I'm over 100 kilos.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, so I'm naturally built this way. My dad is naturally muscular. My brother's naturally muscular, even though they don't lift weights. So I'll always be thick. I'm a wide infrasternal angle, for those of you that know about that sort of thing.
Hmm.
So I'm built like a top field dragster, like a rhinoceros. Definitely not built like a giraffe.
Yeah.
So I'll always be like this. I just don't want to take it any further down the road than it already is. You
Yeah,
know, I'm
sure.
already a top field dragster. I don't need to limit my steering any more than it already is. So
Yeah. But you obviously like the heavy lifting. Is that just, are you saying that that's just the way that you're naturally built, or your
I'm
type of
naturally
training that you're
gravitate
doing now
towards,
is his
I
head still
actually
heavy?
gravitate towards that. But now I do like trap bar deadlifts instead of, you know, traditional deadlifts. And, you know,
Right.
I'll work up to 400 pounds instead of like 700 pounds, you
Yeah.
know.
Wow. That's still
So
heavy.
yeah, it's still heavy, but for me, a 400-pound deadlift is not extremely taxing. So, you
Sure.
know, I still bench. I just don't aggressively arch. I don't aggressively pull my shoulder blades together. I do dumbbell presses. I don't pull my shoulder blades together. I actually reach, and I do a lot of alternating presses. You know, when you jam your shoulder blades together, you limit the mobility of your thorax. My thorax is already stiff enough. I do tons of, like, I've got an attachment that I can essentially sit with a cable and reach on one side, pull on the other side. You know, I do a lot of
Yeah.
one arm
Right.
dumbbell rows where I'm getting a full range of motion through my thorax. I really try and keep what we call the zone of apposition, where my pelvis and my rib cage are lined up. I try to stay out of that hard arch position as much as possible. I try to incorporate things where I get flexion into my life, because I'm very extended naturally. So I do a lot of backwards bear crawls, things like that. A
Yeah.
lot of
Okay.
things on the floor, a lot of arm bars, a lot of landmine press, so I can get my shoulder blade and my scapula moving in a good way. So I incorporate a lot of things where there's shifting and there's rotating, because that's not naturally what I do well.
Mm.
So there's other people that are narrow, more of a narrow build, that over rotate. You have to limit the width, how much they rotate. They're really good at turning. They're not good at creating power. I'm good at creating power, like a top field dragster. I'm just not very good at maneuvering. So I just want to make sure I do things in my training that don't take me further down the road that I'm already at.
Yeah. Got it. So if we're talking to someone who is in a similar situation where maybe they've just got a particular style of training that they're used to. Maybe they haven't looked at other alternatives in terms of what they could be doing in the gym.
Right.
What are some of the things that you are doing now and recommending through your clients, that kind of, because you mentioned a bunch of exercises there. So maybe for
Mm-hmm.
those who don't really know what that is, but maybe we
Right.
can talk to more of the purpose behind it, or what is your intention now that you're sort of, like you said, you're approaching 50. So
Right.
your intention is longevity, is flexibility, I would guess, right? And to have a free flowing body. And
My intention is more movement options. I don't want to
sure.
limit my movement options. So in order to lift really heavy things, you got to take away options, right? So I want to have variability. I want to have the ability to do things in a relaxed manner, like, doing bird dogs that are where I'm flowing, or I'm doing different things where I'm breathing through the exercise as opposed to creating a lot of pressure. You run into trouble when you take away options. It's just like blood pressure. Is high blood pressure bad?
Yeah.
Not if I'm chasing you with a machete, it's not,
Uh-huh.
right? Or, if I'm chasing you with an axe, high blood pressure is great because it'll help you get away. I'm pretty fast. So um, maybe you'd get away, maybe you wouldn't. But um, high blood pressure is bad if you're trying to go to sleep. Low blood pressure is bad if I'm chasing you with a machete. So it's all in context, right? So you can do things that are high threshold, like deadlifts and things like that. You just have to be able to shut it off when you're done. And a lot of people don't shut that strategy off when they're done. It becomes their only strategy. They lose the other. Like a lot of powerlifters will only do high threshold things. They don't do like rolling around on the floor or bird dogs in a relaxed manner, or things like dead bugs where they're breathing through the whole motion. They'll do everything's a brace, right? And so they lose the ability to flow. And so I make sure I incorporate flowing things. I make sure, I'll sit in a deep squat holding onto a post and breathe into my upper back and try to get things to relax and turn off, as opposed to always being toned up, right?
Mm.
Try to breathe in different ways. I try to slow my breathing down, so I'm not over breathing so much.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of variability. I tell people that want to look good and feel good, you want to flirt with performance, you don't want to marry it, because when you push performance, it takes years off your life. There's no high level athletes living to 100 plus years old. So
Mm.
you want to train hard enough to maintain muscle mass and to maintain explosive power. Explosive power is one of the first things that goes, but if you're going to train like a really high level athlete, then it's probably going to take years off your life.
Sure. So when you're in the gym, do you incorporate both of the heavy lifting and also some of those mobility type of movements? Are you doing more
Well, I
unilateral type of
incorporate it
things
into
or?
the exercises that I choose things that automatically put me in a position that make me move more efficiently biomechanically. Right. And
Right.
so heavy, lifting heavy it depends. My definition of heavy, like 100-pound dumbbells are not heavy for me.
Huh. Okay.
To a normal person, that's heavy. But, everyone's definition is a little bit different. But I incorporate exercises that don't drive me into this extended strategy where I'm already stuck. Right. So I choose things that put me in the position that I want to make my body move better. Right. And
Mm.
then when I do things like deadlifts, I make sure after I'm done, I do things that help me move. Right. So, I'm at the point where I don't need to deadlift over 400 or 500 pounds anymore. I can still do it. I just choose not to, because it creates so much compression that over time, the trade-off of that compression is you don't move as well. And then, when you're highly compressed, you don't get blood flow and you don't get fluid and things like that into certain areas of the body. And that's where you end up getting in a lot of trouble.
Mm. What's your take on the pace or the cardio aspect of it? Do you do something that's separate like that, or do you also
I
incorporate
walk
that into your workout?
I walk a lot, and I pair things together. Like I'll pair like a dumbbell press, like on the floor. I'll lay on the floor. I won't pull my shoulder blades together. I'll do like an alternate, laying on the floor with my knees bent. I'll press one dumbbell at a time, and then I'll go over and do a seated pull down with an alternating, with a reach on each side, and then I'll go do like a hack squat or something like that. And I'll do that in a circuit. I might rest a minute in between each one, but I'll do that together in a circuit. And then I'll go do some landmine presses with some, one arm rows on a hammer strength machine where I'm holding both handles and then I'm pulling with one and reaching with the other, pulling with one, reaching with the other. I
Mm.
might do that with a landmine press and maybe some dead bugs or something like that. And I'll do that in a circuit. So that gets me some cardiovascular work. I do sled pushes. I'll do some explosive med ball throws. I'll do some aerodyne bike, or I'll do some 10 seconds as hard as I can, rest 45 seconds, do that for, you know, uh, 8 sets, stuff like that. I walk every day. I walk at least 10 minutes 3 times a day. I stole that from stand efforting, preferably after meals. So I walk a lot. I do a lot of low level, sled dragging, things like that.
Mm. So when back to training, it sounds like a lot of the things that you're incorporating into your training now
Mhm.
is extending, like for example, those back movements, you're extending the scapula, you're really using
Yeah,
the
I would use the word reaching versus
reaching.
extending.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
sure.
I'm reaching. Yes. Well, because most bodybuilders and powerlifters, they pull their shoulder blades together so they
Yeah.
can lift more weight, right? I want to move and I want to get that shoulder blade rotating upwardly, and I want to get the full range of motion. I want to have good movement options, because when you run out of options, that's when you run out of trouble. Run into trouble.
Yeah, got it. But I guess am I on the right track in terms of having that reach in extension and really getting the most length out of that muscle or that contraction that you're doing? Is that the overarching theme of what you're trying to achieve now through the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I'm trying to, and it depends on the person too. Like how everybody is kind of in a different place. Some people need a different approach depending on the shape of their axial skeleton, right? Their ability to change shape.
What do you
So
mean by that?
well, so the shape is, so I'm very extended, right? So I call it J Lo. My pelvis is dumped forward, my ribs are flared up. That's my natural. I've driven that strategy to get really, really strong. So I don't want to drive that strat. I'm going to do things in my training that don't drive that strategy further. I'm going to squat with a safety squat bar. I'm going to squat with a kettlebell. So I keep my ribs down. I'm not arching hard. Somebody that has a different shape, like a sway back type person, which is still going to have the pelvis dump forward, but they're more compressed through the top. So they're compressed through their rib cage, and their belly kind of pops forward a little bit. They got a little bit of pooch belly. So their pelvis is they're almost in a limbo contest. They're kind of walking with their pelvis ahead of them. That requires like a different exercise selection than me. I'm going to need to do things that actually open their chest up and expand their rib cage, get their guts coming up. They're not going to deadlift really well. They're going to squat really well, but there's exercises we can do with them that will help open their rib cage up and make them move better. So a lot of the exercises I choose are based on the person's shape and the structure that they have, because the shape is going to drive the body's ability to move in certain ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
With your approach to diet, is there much that's really changed over the years in terms of how you think about food? I know, like, obviously there's trends at the moment with, I just interviewed Sean Baker just recently with the carnivore diet. So he's like,
sure,
from one extreme, but then I've also got into a lot of like the fasting side of things and the
sure,
autophagy and all that kind of stuff. So there seems to be a lot of fads and trends that are
sure.
sort of coming about. But what's your approach these days?
Well, I try to eat seasonally. I look at nature, and here in Nicaragua, I can eat fruits and vegetables, fruits year round because they're available year round. There's tons of UV light, and Jack Cruz really kind of opened my eyes to the circadian um, food being a signature of the sun, essentially. So, I tried when I was in more northern latitudes, like in Kentucky and things like that, I would eat less fruits and vegetables in the wintertime. I would eat more, proteins and fats and a little less starch. I would still eat potatoes and things like that on my training days. But now I generally, the one thing that's consistently stayed the same since the beginning was always eat a protein at every meal. I think that's the thing where people go extremely wrong. I think your circadian rhythms are just as important or more important than your diet. I think diet's important as well, but I think the big thing that's missing is most people just don't get outside. I actually did an experiment one time where when I first started getting into the light thing, I fasted and then I ate a stack of pancakes at noon in my underwear, indoors under fluorescent lights, and it took my blood sugar. And then a week later, I did the same thing, but I was eating outside at noon in the sun in my underwear. I ate a stack of pancakes, and my blood sugar was almost twice as high eating it indoors than it was outdoors.
Wow.
So the sun plays a huge role in this, and so I try to match what I eat. And I've got a big pineapple on the counter over there, and so I'm in Nicaragua. I can eat pineapples year round, but generally for me, I generally eat protein at every meal, and then I generally tend to eat more carbs on the days I lift and less carbs on the days I don't. I tend to eat less on the days I don't train. I'll even fast on the days I don't train. But it all has context. Like if we have somebody who's been eating the standard American diet or in a really bad place, we'll just try and get them on something like a vertical diet template, like Stan Efferding's template. I really like that with a variety of micronutrients and a variety of foods. But I really encourage myself. I try to eat seasonally. I obviously don't have to do that anymore because I'm in Nicaragua. I've kind of cheated the code.
Mhm.
But generally, I try to get people to, like, if you live in New York, having a pineapple in the middle of December is probably not a good idea. I like tend to go towards real food. I like cycling things. I don't think we're designed. If you look at traditional cultures, they eat with the seasons. Their diet changes with the seasons. It changes with your activity level. So I think there's a time and place for everything. You might need to go through a few weeks or a couple months where you eat a lower carb diet, and then but particularly with women, I don't see women doing well on low carb diets for long periods of time. It usually trashes them. They
Mm.
usually they don't sleep well. I really like. I used to do a podcast with a guy named Kiefer who wrote Carb Backloading, Carb Night, Carb Backloading. I really like backloading carbohydrates post training. It really helps you recover from your training. So I tend not to go extreme on any of it, but I really focus on real foods and getting people to eat seasonally, and particularly with women, getting them to eat enough protein. That's really the most important thing. Is if you get enough protein in, that's going to cover up a lot of things. A lot of people that get into keto too, they don't realize that a lot of them aren't eating enough protein because they're eating so much fat, right? And then they don't get
Mm.
enough salt. And then people get all excited because they lose 15 or 20 pounds and they get on keto and they don't realize they've just flushed a lot of water out and they actually haven't lost any weight at all. And when I tend to train harder, I make sure I eat carbs in those days because I want to be full of glycogen. I want to use that glycogen for training hard. And the days I don't train, I either fast or I don't eat at all. But
Yeah.
that's,
Wow.
for basic people, for the normal person, if they eat, a fistful of protein at every meal, a little bit of starch, obviously if you're in northern latitudes, it should be more things like cabbage and potatoes and things like that, more fibrous things that, traditionally in the past, you could store potatoes in a root cellar over the winter, cabbage, things like that, and then save your fruits and vegetables, more of your fruits and things like that for in the summertime.
Mm. I think it makes total sense. It's quite intuitive on one hand, but then on the other side, it's also just like you said, going with the season. So I think
Right.
where the sun is injecting all of its goodness into your fruits and vegetables in some part of the season, then I think tapping into that energy and that frequency is
Yeah.
something that's hugely important. And we've kind of been taken away from that a lot in the last 20 years or so, I suppose, with the fact that you can get all fruits all year round in any environment. Like here in Australia,
Yes.
it doesn't matter what time of year it is, you can still get pineapples and watermelons and
Mm-hmm.
whatever. So I think it's easily distracted to
Yes.
not think like this wouldn't be able to grow in this climate
Right.
had it not been imported from Mexico or from the US or whatever it is, so it's
Right.
kind of been we've been bamboozled to a degree that we're not really going with the seasons at all.
Right. When if you look at traditional cultures, the ones that lived, like if you look at the work of Weston A. Price, the Inuit, the Maasai, you look at the Okinawans, they eat what's in their environment, and it changes throughout the year. So, you
Mm.
know, Italy, tomatoes are not available all year round. So, they don't eat them all year round. They eat them at
That's
certain times
exactly
of the year.
right.
People are like, what about the Mediterranean diet? Well, do you live in the Mediterranean? So it's like,
Yeah, for sure.
so there's a big mismatch there. Obviously eat real food. You don't have to be perfect. The body's incredibly resilient, but if you're eating real food, if you're eating a wide variety of things, you're drinking high quality water, you're getting outside multiple times a day, you're gonna be in way better place than most people.
Mm. So you mentioned outside and the outdoors a lot. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting that in my lifetime, the sun has been really demonized as such a bad thing. Yeah, you get out in
Yes.
the sun, you've got a slip, slop, slap. In Australia, we have this saying. I'm not sure if it's like what it's like in your town, but yeah, we've got slip, slop, slap. Right? You put on a hat, you put on some sunscreen.
Yes.
All this kind of shit. Right? And
Mm-hmm.
now we're finding out many years later that it's causing cancer. People are
Yeah.
deprived from vitamin D. We've got like such a
Mm-hmm.
shortage, and particularly what we went through in this last couple of years with all this bullshit with the pandemic and stuff like that. The very
Yes.
thing that people needed to have a healthy immune system was the thing that was demonized and
Yes.
taken away in terms of staying indoors. So what is so important about the sun that people don't realize? And I know you mentioned a bunch of things already, but I'd really love to
Right.
maybe get down to kind of sciencey talk if you can,
Sure.
because I think people really need to understand just how important a role that this thing that comes up and goes down every single day
Mm.
plays in
Right.
how this body functions. Yeah.
Well, if you go onto Google and you type in like cancer and circadian rhythm, you'll find that most cancers are directly related to your circadian rhythm. If your circadian rhythm is broken, if you look at night shift workers, they have massive, one of the highest rates of skin cancer is people that work in nuclear submarines, right?
Mm.
They spend their entire existence underneath the ocean and under fake lights. So indoor workers have a much higher rate of skin cancer and if you look at places like England and the the more they recommend staying out of the sun, the higher the skin cancer rate goes. So it's wild. You look at there's been studies that have shown that sun avoidance is equivalent of smoking cigarettes. The problem with the sun improves your outcome, life expectancy in every disease, including melanoma. So it's wild. The thing where Westerners go wrong with the sun is they only go outside in the afternoon, right? Then they wear sunglasses, which tells their brain it's nighttime, so your brain doesn't produce things that help protect your skin. The morning sun is what builds the resilience. Most people, what they do with the sun is they basically run a marathon without training for it, right? And that's not a good idea. You could be like Goggins and break your legs and stuff, but go for it. That's not my style. But the morning sun is what prepares your skin for the afternoon sun. And the tan is your suntan lotion, right? That melanin in your skin is very protective and it's very beneficial to your health. The reason that people that from really dark, really high sun environments have dark skin is that melanin protects them against a lot of the parasites and a lot of the things that are present in that environment. So your tan is one of the most important things you have. But most people, what they do is they are indoors all week in air conditioning under fake lights, and then they basically go outside at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and they bake and they put sunscreen on so that they have a false sense of security, and then they wear sunglasses and they end up cooking, right? So the best thing you can do is start with morning sun. That morning sun, that first little bit of sun. Huberman has finally started talking about this a lot. Jack Cruz, was 10 years ago. Was only there's a lady named what was her name? She wrote a book called Lights Out years ago. She was talking about it long before Jack, but um, that first morning sun that helps with thyroid production, all your hormones, everything. The sun is like a giant Wi-Fi router. It's basically telling your brain what time of day it is. It's running all your hormones. It's running your immune system. Your immune system changes with the seasons. Most people just have no idea how much. Uberman does a really good podcast where he goes on light and how much it affects every cell in your body. So there's a reason why things like, in my opinion, things like colon cancer and prostate cancer and all these things are through the ceiling. Because you think about the average person, they never get light on any of those areas. So there's the red part of the sun is very healing. So that if you're having a lot of issues, health issues, the morning sun and the evening sun are super important. And then of course you need that UV, produce testosterone, you produce vitamin D, cholesterol's, turned into vitamin D from the sun, into testosterone. All these different things come from cholesterol. So we have people telling you, you need to eat less cholesterol and you need to stay inside, and it's just a recipe for disaster. So
Yeah.
the more you can be in touch with nature, the better off you're going to be. And most people's health issues come from little tiny sins against nature, like death from 1,000 paper cuts, right? So but one of the most important things for your health is your circadian rhythm, and most people's circadian rhythms are trashed because they're sitting in their bed at 12 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night, scrolling through TikTok or watching YouTube videos or Instagrams, and it just destroys your sleep, destroys your circadian rhythm, and then once you destroy that sleep, they destroy that melatonin, you're in big trouble.
Mm. Yeah, I'm definitely guilty of that. Hey, and I've got a tracker on my phone that kind of
Mm-hmm.
gives you a little depiction of how much you've spent, how much time you spent
Yeah.
on each of the apps and all that kind of stuff. I'm sure every phone has it, but it does like surprise the shit out of me most weeks when I just think like, I can't believe I've spent
Yeah.
a good working week on this thing. And not to mention that like even now you and I are looking through a screen and we've got the white light. I've got lights here in the
Mm-hmm.
in my home to sort of
Mm-hmm.
just for the purpose of this, and then later on
Sure.
tonight I'll be watching TV, and so your exposure to the screens
Yeah.
and the electromagnetic frequencies and all those sorts of things, like even when sleeping, it's an interesting thing. I've recently just moved my bed, like in the last 6 months, just moved my bed about, I don't know, maybe 15 to 20 centimeters, say 10 inches away from the wall. And
Mhm.
just so I can get away from that frequency, I'm trying to, as much as I
Sure.
can when I don't have my kids with me, is to switch off the Wi-Fi at nighttime and all that kind of
Mhm.
stuff. The phone is definitely
Sure.
a fucking, like,
I
it's a
know
pain
it's
point.
well, it's
I
designed
need,
to trap you. It's designed, and I fall into the same. I like watching history videos, so I'll be watching, and I got to just put the thing in airplane mode.
mm,
I unplug my Wi-Fi router at night, stuff like that. But I turn my screen red as well. You
yeah,
can
yeah,
you
sure.
can do that, and I wear blue blockers. So it's you just got to manage. You got to manage the modern technology and use it. Don't let it use you. And
Mm,
so you have to make deliberate choices to make sure that the technology doesn't destroy you, because I've noticed a huge difference in my overall HRV, my respiratory rate since being here in Nicaragua, because obviously, we've got one cell phone tower for, you know, this whole property, and there's like maybe 4 or 5 Wi-Fi routers around me, as opposed to when I was in Florida, there was probably 400 Wi-Fi routers around me,
yeah,
so,
true.
and 5G and all that. I think maybe we're 2G here, so
Yeah.
it's a big difference.
Yeah, you
It's
don't think of that, hey? It's like a big net, like a big web of Wi-Fi. That's just no matter, even if I stepped out of here and got into the car,
mhm.
or went into a
Yeah,
shopping center or something like that, there's routers everywhere and Wi-Fi signals coming through my body and all that kind of stuff. So you really need to be mindful. I think what I'm getting out of this is you're very conscious about what's going on around in your environment, and you're kind of
yes.
adapting to the particular environment at the time, whether it be where you live or the time of year it is or what you eat and all those sorts
Right.
of things. You mentioned, Jim, at the beginning of the podcast that you're doing things like saunas and float tanks and
Hmm.
all those sorts of things. Why do you do that? And is there any sort of benefits as to what people can pick up on now in terms of
Right.
discussed food, we've discussed
Right.
sunlight, we haven't discussed
Hmm.
water or things like that,
Sure.
and obviously training, but there's obviously little hacks that you're tapping into
Hmm.
in order to increase
Sure.
your body's ability to perform, right?
Sure. Well, the biggest thing is I call it the stress bathtub, right? Or other, people in the quantum space would call it redox potential. Um, the so your body is like a bathtub, right? And so if it fills up and spills over, that's when you get things like autoimmune disease, or you get hurt, or you get sick. So you want to manage that bathtub, and things that build the bathtub up are, hard training, chronic stress, bad relationships, indoor lifestyle. All those things fill the bathtub up. The things that empty the bathtub are good nutrition, getting your sleep, getting outside, getting your sun, restorative yoga, walking, tai chi. For some people, the sauna can be a stressor, too much of a stressor. It's a hermetic stressor, right? Just like cold plunges, just like anything else. So, we're going to customize. Dr. Stillman and I in our coaching programs will customize the like. For me, I don't respond well to sauna, because I'm a northern latitude guy, and I live in a sauna, for heaven's sake. So I don't, my body's adjusting to this very quickly. So I don't really do a lot of sauna. Um, I'll do occasional cold showers and things like that. But float tank is something I don't have. I can go in the ocean here and hang out, but float tank is something I did a lot in the past, because I am such a hard charger. Dark room, floating on 6 inches of water, completely weightless. Being able to slow my breathing down. That's something I think, restorative yoga. I do, some reset breathing drills every day for a few minutes. I actually did a little bit of a meditation before we got on the call today. I think that's the biggest thing, is learning how to shut your mind off, learning how to slow your breathing down, learning how to relax. Modern life is, I compare it to getting in a car, leaving it in park and revving the shit out of the engine all day and never driving anywhere. So most
Yeah.
people are in this chronic state of emotional chronic stress, whether it's traffic or phones or whatever, which I think is way worse than physical stress, because physical stress, manual labor at low levels, is actually very therapeutic to the human body, increases blood flow, it relaxes the nervous system. Doing a good day's hard manual labor is actually good for you. Whereas being under chronic stress all day in an office is very hard on your body. So,
Mm. Do you think that
so
there's
yeah.
a a correlation between training yourself into situations where you are under a lot of stress and pressure physically that
Mm-hmm.
counterbalances the emotional and the mental stress that you might be experiencing. Because some people, Jim, might be listening to this and thinking, well, that's all well and good, but I don't live near the beach. Or that's all well and good, but I
Right.
don't have an outdoor kitchen. And that's all well and good, but I work in an
Well, you got to
office.
create that in your head and your mind, right? So
Sure.
I used to manage stress through exercise, right? And managing stress with the stress might work for temporarily, but it doesn't work long term, right? So uh, managing stress with stress might keep you out of prison, but eventually you're going to pay the price eventually, right? And there's people like Dennis Rodman, Keith Richards, um, um, guys like that can party and do all sorts of crazy stuff. Ozzy Osbourne, and
Mm.
and still live a long life. But those are the exceptions, But most people, there's nothing wrong with training hard. There's nothing wrong with working hard, but you have to do the maintenance. You have to slow down and work in, to steal it from Paul Check again. So the harder you train, you've also got to learn how to shut it off, and you also got to learn how to relax as well. So there's nothing wrong with training hard. If you're going to train hard, just make sure for when you train hard, like Charlie Francis was Ben Johnson's track coach, and he talked about the high-low method. So if you push really hard, then you've got to do some work on a lower intensity to help you recover from that high output. And that's where HRV, things like the Aura Ring, I love the Aura Ring because you can wear it in airplane mode. You can actually see what your nervous system's doing, how it's responding to stress. HRV is a great way to tell you how adaptable you are. If you have a high HRV, that means you're highly adaptable to stress. If your HRV is low, that means your body is not going to respond well to stress. It's not going to adapt well. That doesn't mean you can't have a world record performance. You look at a guy like Michael Jordan, who had the flu and went and played one of the best games of his life. It doesn't mean you can't have a great performance. It just means you're not going to adapt well to that performance.
Yeah, sure.
So you
What are
can
the
use all
supplements
these
that
things,
you?
resting heart rate, all these things. You can use all these things to see if your body's responding in a positive way. And then there's times you want to beat yourself up intentionally just to like create what we call a rebound effect or super compensation. But
Mm.
most average people don't ever get to the level they need to do that.
Yeah, I agree. Look, I think in my work, I work with a lot of people around the lifestyle, and balancing out their emotions, establishing values and their core belief system. So it's a lot
Sure.
of mental mindset, personal growth type work. But I
Uh-huh.
do find that people's threshold for stress and pressure is quite low. So a lot of things
Mm-hmm.
rock them, like in terms of
Yeah.
they can have someone cut them off at the lights, so to speak, and their world's fucking upside down. They're already in a raging fit because
Yeah.
they're at that emotional spillover, like the bathtub analogy that you mentioned before. They're
Mm-hmm.
already at this sort of high point. So my goal in a sense is to say, well, if I can teach you strategies on reducing your stress and eliminating pressure and worry and emotions and
Mm-hmm.
getting rid of those things, then perhaps I can increase your ability to handle stress by as much as say 50%. Now you're working from a glass half empty, so to speak, right? Or a
Sure.
bathtub half
Well,
full.
yeah. Well, a lot of that comes from being in a high rev state, like a high threshold state where you're not working with your, I can't remember prefrontal cortex or whatever, but you're not in the right part of your brain to make logical decisions, your motor and emotional state.
Yeah.
So if you're in an overbreathing state and you're revved up and you're constantly revving and something happens, the chances of you being reacting emotionally to that are much higher. But if you are, putting the tongue on your roof of your mouth while you're driving, and you're breathing through your nose and you're observing and you're being calm and relaxed, and something happens, the chances of you being able to like watch it and make a good decision are much less than if you're already revved up and then something happens and you act out emotionally.
Mm.
So teaching people how to be more mindful, present in the moment is because our world is basically designed to turn you into a complacent, compliant consumer. Because when you're in that high rev state all the time, you end up doing things like eating a whole bag of chips and not even remembering you did it. So slowing down, being mindful, being present and in the moment. I'm drinking some sparkling water, so it's giving me a little, yeah. So being present and in the moment allows you to make better choices, right? And
Mm.
people get in this state where they just they react instead of making a conscious choice.
Totally. Hey, can we switch gears a little bit and head over to peptides? Again, this is
Mm-hmm.
purely
Sure.
personal for me because this is something that I've been researching and looking into for a while. I'm
Sure.
really liking this peptide type of industry, or I guess the supplementation side of it. I think it
Mm-hmm.
seems to be doing miraculous things. Is there something you can talk to in terms of where people might be able to get more information, or at least understand how they work and what role they play?
Sure. Like a buddy of mine named Jay Campbell is the peptide guy. I mean, his entire website is incredible. He gives away all sorts of free information, and he'll even tell you too. But if you live your life like a dumpster fire, to quote him, the peptides are not really going to do much for you. And we
Mm.
don't really push peptide. We get a lot of people that are on HRT, that are on peptides, that are on all these things, and they're not doing well. And we have to teach them, about self care. We have to teach them about slowing down, relaxing. We get them off a lot of that stuff, and then we reintroduce it, and they actually get results from it. So a lot of people will burn the candle at both ends. They start getting tired. They start taking thyroid. They start taking HRT, and they continue to do the same stuff that got them there in the first place. And that works for a while, but then they end up crashing and burning. Instead of crashing their car at 40 kilometers an hour, they crash their car at 110 kilometers an hour, right? So peptides are a tool, just like anything else, but a lot of people rely too much on them, instead of using them as like, something as an enhancer. They're using it as a foundational thing. And you got to have your sleep, your lifestyle. You got to live an insulin controlled life. You got to get outside. You got to do all these things. Then the peptide becomes an actual positive, as opposed to a band-aid, and that's where most people go wrong with that kind of stuff.
How do they work? Can you explain it to me?
Well, they're basically a chain of amino acids that basically, create certain responses in the body, like body protective compound, helps increase healing. So they're basically amino acids. That's why they can't be really patented, or, the pharmaceutical companies can't um, have a cornerstone on them, because they can't be patented. They're just amino acids.
Mm.
And so as you age, you produce less of those. And so you can take these things to help kind of boost things. And there's all sorts of different peptides, but if your lifestyle's not in order, you're not going to get full results from them. And of course, a lot of them are research peptides. I don't know how the laws are in Australia, but most of them are research peptides in the United States. So you got to be really careful where you get them from, because you don't really know what you're getting a lot of times.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like anything, I think you're always going to have people that are going to exploit that market and try and take
Sure,
advantage of
sure.
people that don't want to do any research and just trust whoever's selling them. But yeah, I agree. I think
Well,
there's
and most Americans particularly are looking for a quick fix, right? They're looking for something that's going to give them the results as fast as possible, as little work as possible. So,
100%.
doctors are very eager to do TRT, or to do, prescribe whatever. The big ones are like Ozempic and some of the weight loss drugs now. And so people are really eager to try these things that give them quick results, but they don't change their habits, they don't change their lifestyle, and then they end up getting in trouble in the long run.
Yeah. Look, I hear, I'm picking up what you're putting down in terms of, I remember years ago when I was in competitive bodybuilding, you would see people that were on the gear and they're taking steroids and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And they would look amazing. But then you would see
Yeah.
others that were doing the same thing, if not maybe taking more steroids,
Right.
and they just look like a bag of shit. And you would
Mm.
often wonder, like, why does this person look fantastic and this person looks like a bag of crap?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why. I mean, they're looking at it as a band-aid approach rather than doing all those necessary things in order to
Right.
increase their
Well,
their
I
own
mean, you got
body
genetics
ability.
play a huge role in that too. I took steroids for a long time. I'm on TRT now. Um, and I can look at a bottle of testosterone, and I'll gain weight, gain muscle mass, like, very easily.
Yeah.
A lot of guys that are on steroids don't eat enough. They don't eat enough. They don't train, or they train, maybe they train hard, but they don't rest enough. You've got to sleep, you've got to eat, and that's where a lot of people with that kind of stuff go wrong. And then you've got certain genetics respond really well to that stuff, and certain don't. Like, you could take two guys and put them on the exact same drug protocol, and they're going to get totally different results. Like, I think Ronnie Coleman didn't start taking steroids till after he had one or
Mm.
two pro shows under his
Yeah,
belt, and he
that's
hadn't,
right.
he hadn't taken anything. So if you have that great of genetics, obviously you're going to be able to be a freak show.
Mm.
So um, it's the same with peptides too. Some people are going to respond really well to it, other people are not. And the lifestyle is a huge part of it. And I've seen guys put on freakishly large amounts of muscle drug free, particularly younger guys, because they just ate a lot of food and they slept and they rested a lot. And most people just don't realize how much you have to eat and sleep in order to grow. You know,
Mm.
most people just don't want to do that work. They'll work in the gym. They won't have the discipline to do the sleeping and the eating.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you grow outside of the gym, not inside, right? I mean, that's only
That's
a
correct.
small proportion of the actual work that your body gets that needs to take in order to grow and repair and all those sorts of
Mhm.
things. How often do you train these days? Like how many times per week?
I usually train on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and
Yeah,
then
right.
I usually walk every day, and I do some sort of floor type stuff every day. You know, whether it's rocking on my back or bear crawls, down dogs, things like that, arm bars. I
Mm.
try to do some little form of activity. I get in the ocean and move around. I try to do something several times a day. Try to do a lot more activity, and then I lift like fairly intensely 3 times a week.
Yeah, it's interesting. In my 20s, I grew up with Dorian Yates, and
Mm-hmm.
he obviously
Yeah.
borrowed a leaf out of Mike Mentz's book and things like
Mm-hmm.
that. And he kind of pioneered, well, not so much pioneered, but
Right.
reintroduced this high intensity, low volume sort of workouts, And I
Sure.
grew the most because I was training every single day at that point as a
Right.
teenager, like 16, 17, 18, 19. And then a guy that I met who owned the gym and we've become best buddies, he introduced me to the way of Dorian Yates. And so I went to training 3 times per week and put
Mm-hmm.
on 10 kilos. Like it was just
Yeah.
an
Mm-hmm.
insane amount of weight versus what I was doing before. And I just thought maybe I had a fast metabolism or I was just a hard gainer or
Sure.
something like that. And all of a sudden, between the age of 19 and 21, it
Mm-hmm.
was like, 10, 15 kilos of weight,
Mm-hmm.
good quality muscle too, but only
Sure.
training for about maybe 45 minutes
Yeah.
max, three
Yeah.
times per week, and resting on the other days. Maybe
Yeah.
like going for light
There's something
walks.
to be said about effort, So,
Mm.
um, you know, uh, and Dorian had a really incredible foundation before he started really pushing into that. But also Dorian would do a lot of warm up sets too, so that counts as part of his volume. But that doing one or two really hard sets where you really push yourself, is going to have some really good results, right? But most people don't have a good foundation to be able to do training like that, especially today because kids don't play outside anymore. You think about all the time we spent outside playing, riding bikes, wrestling, goofing around, playing different sports. The kids today don't have the foundational um, movement skills or the foundation of work capacity to even handle hard training.
Mm.
So
Yeah. Yeah, it's a different environment. I struggle with that. That's something with my kids. I'm getting them out doing exercise, getting them in the gym, doing MMA a couple of times a week and things like that. And
great.
there's a trade-off, if it's a wrestle, I'm not gonna lie, like in the physical mental sense, like getting him off
Sure.
the games and getting him into the gym is, I think
Yeah.
there's a trade-off between the two. Hey Jim, in wrapping this up, some
Mm-hmm.
final thoughts or some top tips for people that might be
Sure.
listening, thinking, you know what, I need to change things up a little bit. I've been
Mm-hmm.
stagnant for a while. What would I do?
Well, I think the biggest thing is to get your circadian rhythm in order. Like that's key. I think that's the most important thing for your health is making sure you get up early in the morning with the sun. You get outside, you take sun breaks throughout the day, and you block blue light at night. Put blue blockers on, you get the lights off. I've got an EMR tech light over there that I put on in the background. If I do watch TV, which is rare, I put my blue blocking glasses on. I when the sun goes down, I typically don't have any overhead lights on. Um, Here it's the sun is so intense. When it does go down here in an hour, I'm going to be like, time to sleep. So
Mhm.
I think that's the number one thing is circadian rhythm. If your circadian rhythm is in good shape, you're going to the chance of your health being in order is much higher. If your sleep is good, your chances the sleep is the most anabolic thing you can do. It detoxifies your brain. Just your hormones, everything is just improved when you sleep well. So that's the big thing, and then understanding that what does your body need? Do you need to push harder or do you need to rest? It's like a bank account. Are you overdrawn on your bank account or your credit card's maxed out? You don't spend more money. You try to earn money and put it back in the bank. And most people in today's modern world, they're working 40, 50, 60 hours a week. They're not getting outside, they're not taking very good care of themselves, and then they go and try and make up for it by going to the gym and training, doing 3 or 4 hit classes a week, thinking it's gonna work for them, and a lot of times they end up crashing and burning because of it.
Mm. Beautiful. All right, mate. Thank you so much for this. I really appreciate all your wealth and knowledge that you've been sharing.
Yeah,
I'll
anytime.
be happy to support you in putting all your links, and I know you got some
Yeah,
workshops and events coming up soon, which is really good if people are wherever they
yeah,
are in the world want to attend. So yeah, I appreciate you, man. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to speaking with you again soon.
absolutely. I'd love to do it again anytime.
All right, buddy. Take care.
You too. Cheers.